Ladies and gentlemen, is my voice loud and clear till the end? Good, thank you. I hope you've all had a good lunch. I welcome you all to our panel on reimagining learning. I am Azwa Nayeem, and I will be moderating today's session. I'm the founder of Alokito Hridoy Foundation and also a lecturer at North-South University. Alokito Hridoy in English means enlightened soul. And as the name suggests, we're working to prepare teachers and students with the power of empathy and 21st century skills to become an enlightened generation on the face of the challenges in the fourth industrial revolution. Being an education practitioner myself, I'm super thrilled to be part of this panel today. That includes esteemed individuals who each come with valuable experience and knowledge in the evolving field of education and innovation. I would now request my panelists to please introduce themselves.
Now I think it's my turn to try to give back something, what I've been learning. And I practice innovation with a purpose, and I call it wise innovation. And for wise innovation practices, we need to act wisely, and I call it wise action. And today I'll be talking about it.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Helle Gudmandsen. I work for Save the Children, and I am so fortunate. I have quite a number of colleagues with me here from West Africa and Asia, Bangladesh, which I hope can be part of this workshop as well. I'm the head of education and youth engagement, and if I just say very shortly, Save the Children's strong vision is to ensure that all children survive, they learn, and is protected. And I think we will speak a lot about, the learning today. This is part of this workshop. But you actually need to learn to be able to survive and be protected. It actually all goes together. I come with a background from actually a lot of education background, and I were for a number of years based in South Africa, where I was part of the transformation from apartheid education to democracy. So I think that's maybe the biggest backgrounds. And then I was part last year, that's actually why I ended up working with BRAC. I was part on Unleash, which was 1,000 young people's innovation lab in Singapore.
Hi, I'm Mohammad Majumdar. I'm a professor at BRAC University in the Computer Science and Engineering Department. Thank you all for coming. I'm also the national coach of the Bangladesh Math Olympiad. Did anybody see the pictures of the Math Olympiad in Prothamalu today? So yesterday was our national, the national competition, the results. So the Math Olympiad is a big deal in Bangladesh. I don't know if many of you know about that. I have a very kind of different focus from most of the people here, and that is I work with very elite talent. So I work with exceptional students. We promote them, and they do exceptional things. And the idea is that these exceptional students will do really exceptional things so that they benefit everybody else. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Patrick Hannahan. I'm the project director of the Millions Learning Project at the Brookings Institution, and I look forward to introducing my project here shortly. Brookings is a think tank based in Washington, D.C. Most of my career has been working in education in conflict zones, so I'm quite passionate about working closely with ministries of education to understand how to reach students who most need it. So I'm very excited to be here, and thank you for coming.
Thank you, panelists, for being here today. Although due to global efforts, enrollment in primary schools have gone up, but the secondary and tertiary enrollment in developing countries remain considerably low. 142 million youth are no longer participating in the formal education system, and secondary enrollment rates average only 14% in the low-income countries. But then again, those who do attend school receive a subpar training or an unsatisfactory education from teachers who are unprepared or untrained. So these children graduating from schools are largely unprepared for workplace challenges. Presently, according to ILO, young people under the age of 25 are less likely to find work than adults. On the other hand, a study covering 70 countries by McKinsey Global Institute estimates that by 2020, approximately 83 million high and middle-skilled jobs will remain unfilled because companies or employers looking to hire in developed and developing countries will not find people with the right skills. When companies across the world look for strong communicators, creative innovators, and expert problem solvers, learning remains narrowly focused on reading, writing, and arithmetic, with little attention to workplace needs. And not just for these future employment needs, but also the increasingly complex global challenges such as climate change, cross-border health epidemics like Ebola, and global migrant crisis demand a new approach to learning. This whole scenario becomes even more complex with the rapidly shifting context of the fourth industrial revolution. As the students transition out of a classroom setting, do they leave better equipped to thrive in this new world? Are they equipped to take charge in their communities and solve problems at hand with the resources they have available? These questions require education be re-evaluated for its impact on well-being of youth, and not just for its effectiveness for placing them in some job opportunities. We must come together and commit to achieving more with less, that focuses on prioritizing youth participation, youth rights, and addressing youth aspirations. So with this context in mind, we will now proceed with the presentations. To begin with, we will hear some valuable insights from Helle, and then we will hear from Patrick about the Millions Learning Project, followed by Dr. Mohi, who will talk about the WISE action model. So Helle, please go ahead.
Before I start, I'd like to ask you, how many of you went to school 6 years? How many of you went to school 12 years? How many of you went to university? So we are all the very fortunate people who are here today. When you come from Save the Children, as I do, we have decided to focus on the most marginalized children and youth in the world. The most marginalized youth at the moment are the youth on move, the one who cannot see opportunities where they are. Huge number of them are refugees, and about even more are what you would call internal displaced in their country. 3 reports came out in 2018. The Global Monitoring Report from UNESCO, Monitoring Education, showed that if you are refugees or internally displaced, the chances of you to go as far as you have gone in your education is almost non-existing. Another report came out from UNHCR speaking about refugee education, where they actually state that it's only 2% of the refugees in 2018 who got a chance to go into a university degree. In Save the Children, we made a report called Time to Act, because it is time to act. We have, and just to say some of the protected crises in the world, I'll give a mention of a couple of them. One of them is in Syria, which is, somebody asked me, is this Global South? Yes, it's definitely Global South. We have a huge problem that there are so many millions of Syrians who has left the country, and the majority of the youth there will never finish, even if they were. Syria had quite a good education system, but they will not enter into education systems wherever they are, if they're in Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, or if they've gone all the way up to inside Europe. So this is our hugest problem. We have a lot of young people on the move in West Africa. In West Africa, we have this immigration, people trying to find new ways to go to Europe. A lot of them don't succeed getting education. It is a tremendously disaster. Even a lot of them actually do not survive. So what do we do to make sure that we reach these young people on the move? Because they are often the one that has left the villages, left the town where they lived, and they don't have a network. For years, we made programs in the development sector, just thinking, and you'd have politicians standing up saying, we just need to make sure that people get technical skills. It was almost like they didn't even need to really learn, I would say, the basic fundamentals of reading and writing. And life skills were never considered. Just that they can be a workforce will give them technical skills. Well, the reality is that technical skills are not enough. If you ask interviews of people on the move in West Africa or Syrian refugees, they will say the biggest loss they've had is that they don't have that feeling of belonging. This morning we heard about 4 people saying that they were radicalized and wanted to change the world. They're angry young people, and we have a big chance of getting many, many angry young people if they don't have a feeling of belonging and a feeling of that they are appreciated in this world. So we need to make sure that we actually find the missing link. And the missing link might be that it is the life skills, that it is the networking, that it is the self-esteem that combines the quality education. Quality education is not only numeracy, literacy, and whatever skills of science you need. It is the rest part of you being a whole person and belonging somewhere. It is that network that you create that will make you, even if you get skills, to one day have a job. 21st century skills means that most of us will not have, or the young people will not have a job, just one job for the whole life. There'll be many jobs which are just assignments that are short. To get into those assignments, first of all, you need to know your rights, so you're not being exploited. But you also do need a network to actually become part of, this informal work, which is a lot of what people do in Africa and in Asia. So these are some of the things that we need to think of today. Can we come up with a way to scale it up for young people to become part of not just the economical, but the social and political ways of ensuring the Sustainable Development Goal? Ban Ki-moon said, I was in New York. Many people were very impressed that the Pope was there. I was very impressed that Obama was there, and I'm so sad he's not there any longer, at least as the president. But Ban Ki-moon said there, he said, youth are the torchbearer, the new generation who will fulfill the Sustainable Development Goals. If we don't change the way we work, that is not going to happen. So let's hear some of the ideas that might be able to scale up and make a difference for youth in the world. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for coming, and particularly to BRAC for hosting this great conference, and I feel very fortunate to be included in it, so thank you for that. My name is Patrick Hannahan, as I said, and I'm the project director for the Millions Learning Project at the Brookings Institution. So I'm really excited to be here today to introduce my project to you. I'll do my best to stay on time. So just quickly, on the Brookings Institution, we're a think tank based in Washington, D.C. that was established about 100 years ago with a mission of conducting in-depth research that leads to new ideas to solve problems at many levels of society. So I work at the Center for Universal Education at Brookings, which is housed within the Global Economy and Development Program, but Brookings does a lot of additional research in economic foreign policy studies and really anything that is of interest to research. So what do we mean by scale? I think this is a term that can be pretty hard to pin down. It's obviously one of the themes of our conference here. And at least at the Center for Universal Education, if I were to pause the conversation now and just kind of poll the audience, I think we might come up with a word cloud that looks something like this. So scaling is often thought of as growing an idea or an initiative, reaching new communities, encouraging new behaviors. I'm sure we might each have our own different definition of scale. So at the Center for Universal Education, we're less interested in the precise definition of scale, but more interested in beginning with a definition, because how we define scale influences how researchers approach the problem, how donors allocate funds, how policymakers design programs. So the precise definition of scale can and should change depending on what you're trying to accomplish. At the Center for Universal Education, we think about scaling as expanding impact in ways that improve people's lives, and we believe there's a lot of approaches you can take to accomplish this. So Millions Learning is a research project that began in 2014, looking at how to scale quality education interventions in low and middle income countries. Millions Learning 1.0, as we call it, lasted for 3 years. Our central question during this period was, where have we seen large-scale progress in education, especially in learning outcomes, and how did this happen? We drew heavily upon seminal research and also conducted a global case study where we looked at 14 case studies of education interventions that had successfully scaled to varying degrees. And we really sought to look at interventions from a variety of education sectors, from early childhood through primary and secondary into technical and vocational skills. And then we also really sought geographic diversity in the cases that we were looking at. The Millions Learning Report was published in 2016. This is a publicly available document if you'd like to take a look online. And looking across the programs and policies studied during this phase, some common themes and patterns emerged. These are the 14 core ingredients that contribute to scaling quality learning. And I could talk on and on about these, but just to say kind of quickly that we divided them into 4 different categories: design, delivery, finance, and the enabling environment. We always like to reiterate that this is by no means a recipe or a blueprint for scaling, but these are things that we believe people working in scaling and education should be thinking about as they're relevant to their context. During phase 1, we identified several shared scaling challenges, and I'm sure these are things that all of you in your work can identify with. First, the lack of evidence use. We as a research institute really endeavor to package our research in actionable ways that policymakers can take and apply without having a special set of skills needed in addition to that. So a real lack of evidence use was found. Second, there was little opportunity to reflect and adapt during the scaling process, and groups and individuals that we met with really had a strong appetite for more opportunities to share their learning and communicate with those doing similar initiatives. And lastly, many felt like they were working in isolation. When you think about our workshop theme today of reimagining learning, there's so many great approaches taking place around the world that are building these critical skills that Helle alluded to, this breadth of skills that students are going to need to participate in a rapidly evolving global economy. But these oftentimes operate as islands of excellence. So at Millions Learning, we're very passionate and interested in learning how can we scale these approaches to reach more children and youth to address the global learning crisis. So a key question, therefore, that bridged the phase 1 research and where we are now in phase 2 was how can we help create these structures and systems for flexible, iterative, peer-to-peer learning? So for much of 2016 and 2017, we continued our research of innovation hubs, accelerators, all types of similar groups that sought to share learning and knowledge as they went about scaling. And we took this research to inform the development of our phase 2 research strategy, the real-time scaling labs. So this takes us to the current phase, which just began in earnest about 8 months ago. So it's still very much in the startup. But during this phase, we're applying and testing the principles from phase 1, particularly the 14 core ingredients, in a number of countries. This is a really exciting operational research phase for us. If people are familiar with Brookings or think tanks generally, oftentimes the publishing of a report is sort of the end of the research process with the hope that policymakers take it up and use it to inform program direction. We're very fortunate to have this multi-year second phase where we're able to go out into the field and test these research findings. So just a note that other programs at the Center for Universal Education are working diligently to identify these innovative models with the potential to leapfrog progress in education, particularly with 21st century skills, communication, collaboration, empathy, critical thinking, things like this. Millions Learning is primarily focused on, once those interventions have been identified and shown to be effective, how do we work with governments and other stakeholders and countries to scale them up? These are our key research questions that serve as the foundation of our work in this phase. There are, of course, others, but these are what we're really intently focused on. So what are those barriers faced when scaling, and how can they be overcome? What is an ideal makeup of this adaptive learning peer-to-peer mechanism that can support scaling? And what is needed to help build decision makers' capacity? Back to what I was saying earlier, how can we really make our research accessible and digestible for researchers who are oftentimes dealing with just a mountain of data and information? So we're launching real-time scaling labs in partnership with local institutions and governments in a number of countries, which I'll get to in a moment, with the goal of encouraging a stronger link between research and practice. Brookings will add value to this process by learning about the scaling process as it unfolds in real time, thereby adding to the global evidence base and sharing findings in an ongoing manner in practical, actionable ways. We will support interventions by providing a safe space and opportunity for reflective learning among key stakeholders, and we've developed tools to facilitate this process. And lastly, we will rigorously document the scaling process. Over and over again during phase 1, research revealed that the global education community is doing a good job documenting outcomes, but there's not enough around the process for reaching these outcomes. This is the overarching framework for the labs, which we're currently tailoring to each context with our local partners. So the labs are not a physical space, although that can conjure up images of like a scientific laboratory. So the lab is a group of approximately 20 key stakeholders in each of these countries, drawn from a variety of sectors. So of course the Ministry of Education is a prominent member of each lab, but we're also involving civil society, the private sector, academia, really whoever in that context should be part of a lab process like this. And we really rely on our local partners to drive that identification process. So overall, we view the labs as providing a safe space for these stakeholders to come together and really honestly look at how the scaling process is going, and importantly, make changes as necessary. I think most of us, if not all, could identify with the fact that oftentimes in development programs, you're sprinting towards KPIs or milestones developed at the beginning of the project with no time built in to look at how things are going and change course. So this is really what Brookings, as just a natural convener in these countries, is hoping to promote, a space where the government really feels like they're driving the process and have ownership and using real-time data to make course changes as necessary. So this is our initial cohort of real-time scaling labs. As you can see, we're working in Jordan, Cote d'Ivoire, Botswana, Tanzania, and the Philippines, with an additional lab looking at playful learning in the US city of Philadelphia. I want to state that we're still in the startup process and we're actively looking for new lab opportunities, particularly in Bangladesh and surrounding countries. So we'd be really interested in speaking to some of you about that later on. We really searched for diversity in location and focus sector for each of these interventions, and we use a set of selection criteria. First is labs must be demand driven. So we want to work with NGOs and with governments who see value in Brookings participating in this process. So that's really our first and core selection criteria. Second, we are working with interventions that have rigorous evidence of their effectiveness already conducted before the scaling lab process started. Third, we're looking for strategic timing and political will and buy-in, where the government really believes in the process and wants to be a part of it. And then lastly, we want to work with interventions that address a critical education issue facing many countries, such that the learning that we're taking from the labs, we can then share with the education community. Just one last note, and we like to remind ourselves of this, is that in each of these countries, if Brookings did not exist at all, the NGO and the government would still be trying to scale this intervention. So that helps us feel like this is an authentic process whereby we're adding value in ways that the government thinks that we could do it, while also as Brookings and as a global think tank, really focusing on what can we be learning from this process and how can we be sharing that with not only partners and countries, but the broader education community. Also, the labs are linked to one another. So for instance, in December, we kicked off the program by bringing representatives from each of these labs together where we provided training on the tools that we've developed and really laid the groundwork for this in-person collaboration that will be important as the process moves along. So I just wanted to close with a quote from a report published last year by the Center for Universal Education called the Leapfrog Report, which states, "We will not achieve the transformational change needed to address both skills inequality and skills uncertainty with small islands of innovation. Governments need to be more engaged in how and when to bring innovative approaches into their ongoing efforts to drive education system reform." So I'm proud to be at this conference learning about all the great work your organizations are doing to develop these types of approaches. And at Millions Learning, we remain very committed to learning how we can work closely with governments to scale these up. So thanks for your time and attention.
Navi and myself were walking right below this lighthouse, which is just about 40 miles south of San Francisco. He was telling me, "Mohi, you should plan to attend Frugal Innovation Forum." I didn't even ask him where it is and when. I just told him, just let me know when and where, and I'll be there. And here I am today. And thanks to those people who helped me to be here. By the way, Navi Raju is actually the person who co-authored the Frugal Innovation book and coined the term. And we've been actually preparing this together as well. Let me start with a little bit of context before I dive into this wise action. At practice, I run a little organization in Silicon Valley, but part of a large organization called Fujitsu. My organization, we call it Open Innovation Gateway. We practice open innovation with open frame of mind. In our practice, we see the whole world could be our wise community as well. That's in the bottom there. And then in practice, we practice innovation with a purpose, as I mentioned earlier. And to do so, we really need to focus on actions that also planned wisely. And I'm going to focus on that. And that's relevant to our topic today around education. A little more about the way we operate. As I mentioned, we practice frugal mindset and also approaches in our organization, OIG. So to do so, in every project, we see it from before, during, and after lens. So when we are not necessarily doing a real massive project, that's the before part. And Navi calls our team Frugal Team. And when we do real project, we have been doing for the last 42 months more than 20-some projects, global projects, as well as many different interesting experimentation. And that's the during part. And we actually work with many great minds in the world, not only in Silicon Valley, but beyond. And then when we are done with the project, that's the after piece. But at that time, and again, each and every member within the team and the community also can become more wiser. And one thing I want to add here, in our practice, we call it real and now. I have a great respect for the past, but at the same time, I'm curious for the future, but we focus on real and now, what we can do. So that's a bit of context. And let me now bring it to today's topic, education. And in education, we can talk about challenges for days, and I can keep talking about it for hours as well, which I'm not going to do it. But as we all know, there's many different challenges, but I want to share challenges, those are common, not only in developing countries, some of those are in developed countries as well. For example, in developing nations, their access to quality education and opportunities after graduation is, and even the country could be wise nation. And that's the idea that we're working on. And at the same time, I want to share some of the wisdom that we learned from the great minds, such as Henry Jesper. He talked about it's a big mistake to try to do it all yourself. You can do it better with others. So in wise action, this is an idea. It's still, I want to work with everyone, including young people, so that we can create a platform, and we call it wise action platform. And platform needs platform elements, services, technologies, and platform enablers. And young people also need to take part in it. And in platform element, if you take a look at the services, there's some ideas. And again, I'm not saying this is it, but this is an idea for all of us to work together. And we'll be doing a workshop later today, and during that we'll talk more about it, and I'll go into that. And then, just go back a little here, this one, I want to emphasize a lot of challenge that we deal with today. Many of the time people try to know today's job with yesterday's tool and yesterday's concepts. And I think that's a big mistake. We need to think about differently. And then we need empathy, and empathy with search and execute mode. And then we need to take frugal approach to do it fast, do it better, do it cheaper. And we also need to have some kind of measures there. So this is a kind of draft idea for all of us to work together, how we can create a wise action impact dashboard. So from the bottom, as you can see, wise intention that goes all the way to wise action. So each and everyone can have their own dashboard to create it. And then, as we all know, we need to design education to expand consciousness of the people. And to do so, education is not just gaining some knowledge to pass and get better score in the exams. Not just some skills, we need mindset. And we need all this together. And we need to learn, break, create for a better future. And just briefly to end, and we always talk about human development and human development. There's many different ways of saying that. So for H, we try to unpack it: humble, unstoppable, just like the tree there, motivated, active, and noble practices. So that everyone can say in the future, so today I'm wise and I'm challenging myself, taking myself. And finally, to finish up, that again, this platform can help the whole nation can become wise nation. And in Bangladesh, as a proud Bangladeshi Canadian, I can also say that we could be poor, but we could be a wise nation. I want you to join me in this. And we can all ask ourselves, if not me, who? And if not now, when we do it. Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, for your presentations. These are some amazing scopes and opportunities to nurture and empower innovative projects and interventions for youth well-being and education. And of course, as Helle said, no development is complete without ensuring inclusivity. No youth should be left behind. That must be ensured. But I have a question to ask you all. How many of you have seen superhero movies? Any superhero movie? Okay. How many of you love Batman? Wonder Woman? Superman? Let's assume the roles of our superheroes as we walk into the next part of the session, which is the workshop. Let me quickly tell you the norms of the workshop. Can I have the slide up, please? So the duration of the workshop is going to be for 20 minutes. The room is going to be divided into 4 themes. The 4 themes are the role of technology in teacher development and pedagogy, emerging models. Well, empathy is empathy in scaling opportunities for youth by Dr. Mohi. And finally, finally, assessment, learning and assessment will be headed by Dr. Mahbub. So participants can gather around the themes in 4 corners of the room. The discussion questions will be identifying the existing gaps, but also discussing the possible innovative models and solutions around these themes. The panelists, after 20 minutes, will get 5 minutes to wrap up the session and to share their reflections. And that's about it. Let's go ahead. So the 4 corners of the room will be the 4 themes. Here.
Yes. And together with others, it needs their passion. So that's the idea we're talking about. Anything unclear, I'm happy to explain. Then we need to work together. We have only got another 10 minutes. So,
think logically, within the thinking was not a part of that. We can only think about different kinds of our activities just after graduation. Where people get to know each other, where people can share knowledge, like us back something, learn from him, or together we create a synergy in the group, and that only happens in the platform where people come up and talk. Where we can a knowledge and experience in the platform. Right, and the more diverse, the more synergy is created.
you're writing, I'm just going to color and there's no right or wrong, there's some wisdom in the table here. So we'll be taking advice and help from everyone here. So why we care now, we're not talking about why we need it, and somebody on now, it doesn't necessarily need to be.
Make that environment so it actually creates that critical thinker that's able to apply that technology sometimes.
About
Giving that a shot, right? See how it's potentially broadening it. And switch gears to teachers. I think we can all agree that the teachers is part of that. Should be happening. I think a lot of those things that have such, my heart goes out to teachers, I think if they're especially.
So what are we going to do tomorrow?
Certainly under probably uncompensated.
Monday morning.
Focus on concentrating on technology-based learning. So even if it is paper pencil based, but formative assessment definitely gives the feedback back to the students, and then they can understand where they're.
Called rote learning, which is like me standing here having a blackboard, I'm talking, and you can copy what I do. Do you recognize it? Okay. Is that the teaching and pedagogic we want? Many programs I've seen for students that even on technological platforms, iPad programs, they're often the same. They just make technology.
It's rather we collectively that improve, right? And for what we really need to do, there's many different things to do, of course. But we need young people, of course, as a part of the team player, but we need sponsors and people. Because of time, I didn't go too much on it. I think I would rather do it here in doing it how. We call it search and execution model. So many companies, even in Silicon Valley, they operate with execution mental model. I intentionally didn't use the term
boleh?
to actually work on you don't necessarily have to do what I'm because you work together with this particular combination of yet old enough and the young people working on it. Okay, now let's get started. I want you guys to okay. So who wants to do let's do it maybe all four of you or you decide. You can stick to saying that our yeah, exactly. So this is
এরপরে স্টেজ দিয়ে এই পাশে নিয়ে motion.
How they are gonna represent us, our content, that they can use the technology, they can use, but they can't use the technology like a board. Like they're they can use it in a blackboard, but nowadays they're making slide. The way we don't want to use the technology. We want to use the technology like more specific, and we want to learn more. I'm talking as a student. So if my teacher is using the technology, I want him to use it like very specific. Some students in a remote area, they can have a bigger picture from a good, like a city or from another country through the technology. So we can use it effectively. So there was critical thinking. So how teacher can connect critical thinking with technology. So I think yesterday we were talking about something like that. Look, I forgot the name, but she was telling that her daughter, right, that the world is look like a ball, but the teacher said that no, you have to write the world is look like an orange. So I think the perspective, it can change through technology, and the teacher can have a great vision, and it can help the student to develop the creative thinking as well. So thank you.
Okay, we had a great conversation, so I want to just thank my group for their participation. I will do the best I can to sort of consolidate some of the things we discussed. So we sort of began by talking about how it's interesting that the education model has persisted globally for a century or so. That idea of a classroom, one teacher, many students, sort of the teacher as dispenser of knowledge to students. And we all sort of looked at that with a critical eye for creative ways that we might change that. 21st century skills, of course, something that I think all of us in this room agree are important, but teaching empathy, for instance, is much easier said than done. And so what are ways that that could actually happen? And a lot of interesting discussion took place about early childhood interventions, because that's such a critical point in time in a child's life. I think between the age of 0 and 5, a child develops the vast majority of their neurons that promote learning throughout their life. And then we kind of broke it down, or the conversation emerged into different stakeholders in this process of finding new models. We talked about government, teachers, and parents. So we started with government by saying they could benefit from rethinking curriculum. There's many countries that have been using the same curriculum for decades, and oftentimes there's many different types of curriculum being used in countries. So governments could benefit from sitting down and really thinking through new approaches, testing them out. The example of the BRAC play labs was brought up as a very current, promising intervention in Bangladesh, which the government has invested in really testing out, seeing how it works, scaling up, which is very much in line with what Millions Learning hopes can happen elsewhere. The access versus quality issue needs to be addressed. There's been a lot of pride in the global education community over the recent years in this massive increases in student enrollment, which is a great thing, yes, but it's really taking its toll on classrooms, and particularly on teachers who now have twice as many students in some cases, so education quality inevitably suffers. Enhancing the teacher profession is one thing that a government could try and do as well, just to promote more people wanting to become teachers. Moving on to teachers, we all, or at least I said, my heart goes out to them, because I think teachers are really that critical touch point between these emerging models and these innovative approaches and then actually reaching students. So, when you have a huge classroom, teachers might think about bringing parents, into that process more, because we all agreed parents are a really valuable resource in international education that should be tapped and could really help fill some of these gaps. But oftentimes parents just don't see that they're supposed to be contributing to their child's learning. They send the child to school to learn, right? And that's where the teacher is supposed to teach them. But we could really make drastic steps in international education by helping parents understand that they can really help create a vision for their students in the classroom. There's much they can be doing at the home to promote learning. And if somehow we could really improve that teacher-parent relationship, it could have a great effect on students. Thanks.
A fantastic team, because this is all about next generation, and this is for this platform for them and with them, and we have collectively worked on it. And I'm going to invite my team to present.
Hello everyone. My team has come to a marvelous decision. That's why we could do this. Their support makes us believe that this can happen. First of all, I need to know everyone present here who thinks yourself a wise one. Do you really think you are wise? Okay, we got some of hands, but I think, personally I think, no one is wise. It's our action what makes us wise. So Today our theme was Wise Action Platform, and we could collaborate some issues like why, how, and what. Like how these things can make a wise action platform for our youth. I'm a young person, and personally I feel I'm a representative of our youth. So now I'm telling why we need wise action platform. Because long-term impact, our first point was long-term impact. We need long-term impact because now we can see that many of us, like many of youth, they are mentally disabled. They are not doing something which can profit their society, or which can profit their social values, which can actually make us useful. Keeping up with the pace, and third one was break our barriers. We need this platform to break our barriers because we have so much social barriers to not to do and to deal with. And what I feel why we need it, because we want to connect. If we connect, we can reshape and we can regrow, and that's the betterment of our society.
Okay, so now we move on to how are we going to do this. So we'll be harnessing the passion and wisdom. We'll be trying the search and execution model, and also we'll be doing contextualization. And what are the things that we're going to do here? We'll be needing young people, of course, and to collaborate with them, we need experience and wisdom, which we'll get from the experienced people. And we need some sponsors who will be helping us while we take these actions. Now the next part is presented.
Thank you, everyone. I'm Fatima, and I will be talking about the impact of this model, basically our empathetic design model. So what will be the impact while we establish the model? So basically, our first point was there will be less unemployment. How there will be less unemployment? Because when we will be inclusive, when we'll work together, there will be new innovations, and thus employability will increase. So moving on then, when there will be unemployment problem will be eradicated, then we will see the clear picture of our society. Like if we stand above from where we are now, then we got to see the clear picture of the society. And then we will find a regenerated society. We can call ourselves wise. Like when we get to work together in a platform and we collaboratively we solve our problems through these process, then we will see a wise nation, and that was our goal. Thank you.
Thank you. As you've seen, this passionate young generation, the young people who came up with such a great idea in such a short period of time. It didn't take us hours. It was 20 minutes. Okay? So I'm very energized. I think that if we can all work together and globally, then Bangladesh itself could be an example, could be a role model of a wise nation, which can be also shared with many others around the world. And I think this team already created a foundation for it. Thank you.
That was an amazing presentation. Moving on, we finally have learning and assessment from Dr. Mahbub's team. Sarah will be presenting.
Hi, thank you. We were on Dr. Mahbub's really cool team. We have folks from Teach for Bangladesh and from BRAC Education, so I had the chance to hear some of the best ideas in education and write them down as fast as I can. The group talked a lot about problems with exams and questioning if exams are the right way to assess students. There was concern that the feedback with exams, it's not timely or meaningful to students, and that led us to talking about should that type of assessment, how can we make it more meaningful? So we looked at some alternatives, and some were process-based learning curriculums, extracurricular activities, and project-based learning. But the problems that we talked about with these alternatives is that often the national curriculum or curriculum standards, they can be a bit of a roadblocks to letting these things happen. And then talking about what assessment should be, so we said they should be meaningful for students. They should be an opportunity for meaningful feedback. They should be process-based, where students are assessed on their process, not necessarily only on the performance. Also, it should be encouraging cognitive development, and also giving emphasis to formative assessment, not only summative assessment. Anyone want to add anything else? Okay. Thank you, and Shaquille will be performing this in a rap version later. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, I couldn't have stressed it any further. The world population is very young. 42% of the world population is below the age of 25. And as one part of the world asks, do we really need education at all? The other questions, how can education be more purposeful in a world that we don't know what it will look like? I feel some of the presentations, in fact, all of the presentations here, in some ways answer those questions, starting from looking at teacher delivery using technology, reimagining teacher delivery and teacher training and so on, moving on to emerging models around play and empathy, and finally looking at an amazing WISE platform created by the youth themselves, and finally how, despite the roadblocks, we can try to reimagine assessment around more purposeful outcomes. Thank you so much. I would now request you, so the coffee break is on. You can take the discussion forward in the coffee break. Thank you so much for the session.
Thank you so much, and thank you, Azwa, for this wonderful moderation. And the coffee has been served in front of the auditorium, and it's you have 30 minutes, so get refreshed. And yeah, and thank you so much for all the inspiration, inputs, and I think you have learned so far a lot, and also gave a lot of valuable feedback to our trainers as well. And another announcement is there is going to be a pop-up class at the auditorium simultaneously with the coffee break. So if you want to hang out with Dr. Susan Ahmad from the Global Entrepreneurship Network, who will be going to run a metrics program assessment and its impact. So you can, sorry, sir.
I'll just announce it. If you want to nerd out for 30 minutes on metrics for assessment and impact, go to the pop-up classroom upstairs.
Yeah, you can just grab your coffee and tea and join the session. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for letting me take that.
Hello. আচ্ছা স্যার কথা বলছি
at many levels of society. So I work at the Center for Universal Education at Brookings, which is housed within the Global Economy and Development Program, but Brookings does a lot of additional research in economic foreign policy studies and really anything that is of interest to research. So what do we mean by scale? I think this is a term that can be pretty hard to pin down. It's obviously one of the themes of our conference here. And at least at the Center for Universal Education, if I were to pause the conversation now and just kind of poll the audience, I think we might come up with a word cloud that looks something like this. So scaling is often thought of as growing an idea or an initiative, reaching new communities, encouraging new behaviors. I'm sure we might each have our own different definition of scale. So at the Center for Universal Education, we're less interested in the precise definition of scale, but more interested in beginning with the definition, because how we define scale influences how researchers approach the problem, how donors allocate funds, how policymakers design programs. So So the precise definition of scale can and should change depending on what you're trying to accomplish. At the Center for Universal Education, we think about scaling as expanding impact in ways that improve people's lives, and we believe there's a lot of approaches you can take to accomplish this. So Millions Learning is a research project that began in 2014, looking at how to scale quality education interventions in low and middle income countries. Millions Learning 1.0, as we call it, lasted for 3 years. Our central question during this period was, where have we seen large-scale progress in education, especially in learning outcomes, and how did this happen? We drew heavily upon seminal research and also conducted a global case study where we looked at 14 case studies of education interventions that had successfully scaled to varying degrees. And we really sought to look at interventions from a variety of education sectors, from early childhood through primary and secondary into technical and vocational skills. And then we also really sought geographic diversity in the cases that we were looking at. The Millions Learning Report was published in 2016. This is a publicly available document if you'd like to take a look online. And looking across the programs and policies studied during this phase, some common themes and patterns emerged. These are the 14 core ingredients that contribute to scaling quality learning. I could talk on and on about these, but just to say kind of quickly that we divided them into 4 different categories: design, delivery, finance, and the enabling environment. We always like to reiterate that this is by no means a recipe or a blueprint for scaling. Scaling in education should be thinking about as they're relevant to their context. During phase 1, we identified several shared scaling challenges, and I'm sure these are things that all of you in your work can identify with. First, the lack of evidence use. We as a research institute really endeavor to package our research in actionable ways that policymakers can take and apply without having a special set of skills needed in addition to that. So real lack of evidence use was found. Second, there was little opportunity to reflect and adapt during the scaling process. And groups and individuals that we met with really had a strong appetite for more opportunities to share their learning and communicate with those doing similar initiatives. And lastly, many felt like they were working in isolation. When you think about our workshop theme today of reimagining learning, there's so many great approaches taking place around the world that are building these critical skills that Helle alluded to, this breadth of skills that students are going to need to participate in a rapidly evolving global economy. But these oftentimes operate as islands of excellence. So at Millions Learning, we're very passionate and interested in learning how can we scale these approaches to reach more children and youth to address the global learning crisis. So a key question, therefore, that bridged the phase 1 research and where we took this research to inform the development of our phase 2 research strategy, the real-time scaling labs. So this takes us to the current phase, which just began in earnest about 8 months ago, so it's still very much in the startup. But during this phase, we're applying and testing the principles from phase 1, particularly the 14 core ingredients, in a number of countries. This is a really exciting operational research phase for us. If people are familiar with Brookings or think tanks generally, oftentimes the publishing of a report is sort of the end of the research process, with the hope that policymakers take it up and use it to inform program direction. We're very fortunate to have this multi-year second phase where we're able to go out into the field and test these research findings. So just to note that other programs at the Center for Universal Education are working diligently to identify. Learning is primarily focused on, once those interventions have been identified and shown to be effective, how do we work with governments and other stakeholders and countries to scale them up? These are our key research questions that serve as the foundation of our work in this phase. There are, of course, others, but these are what we're really intently focused on. So what are those barriers faced when scaling, and how can they be overcome? What is an ideal makeup of this adaptive learning peer-to-peer mechanism that can support scaling? And what is needed to help build decision makers' capacity? Back to what I was saying. Brookings will add value to this process by learning about the scaling process as it unfolds in real time, thereby adding to the global evidence base and sharing findings in an ongoing manner in practical, actionable ways. We will support interventions by providing a safe space and opportunity for reflective learning among key stakeholders, and we've developed tools to facilitate this process. And lastly, we will rigorously document the scaling process. Over and over again during phase 1, research revealed that the global education community is doing a good job documenting outcomes, but there's not enough around the process for reaching these outcomes. This is the overarching framework for the labs, which we're currently tailoring to each context with our local partners. So the labs are not is a prominent member of each lab, but we're also involving civil society, the private sector, academia. Really, whoever in that context should be part of a lab process like this, and we really rely on our local partners to drive that identification process. So programs, you're sprinting towards KPIs or milestones developed at the beginning of the project with no time built in to look at how things are going and change course. So this is really what Brookings, as just a natural convener in these countries, is hoping to promote. The space. So this is our initial cohort of real-time scaling labs. As you can see, we're working in Jordan, Cote d'Ivoire, Botswana, Tanzania, and the Philippines, with an additional lab looking at playful learning in the US city of Philadelphia. I want to state that we're still in the startup process and we're actively looking for new lab opportunities, particularly in Bangladesh and surrounding countries, so we'd be really interested in speaking to driven. So we want to work with NGOs and with governments who see value in Brookings participating in this process, so that's really our first and core selection criteria. Second, we are working with interventions that have rigorous evidence of their effectiveness. And then lastly, we want to work with interventions that address a critical education issue facing many countries, such that the learning that we're taking from the labs, we can then share with the education community. We're adding value in ways that the government thinks that we could do it, while also, as Brookings and as a global think tank, really focusing on what can we be learning from this process and how can we be sharing that with not only partners and countries, but the broader education community. Collaboration that will be important as the process moves along. So I just wanted to close with a quote from a report published last year by the Center for Universal Education called the Leapfrog Report, which states, "We will not achieve the transformational change needed to address both skills inequality," all the great work your organizations are doing to develop these types of approaches, and at Millions Learning, we remain very committed to learning how we can work closely with governments to scale these up. So thanks for your time and attention.